entertain you with a lot of data following Julia and David and also following your lunch. So if this is not exciting enough, our Matthew from the Urban Institute, he might do a housing finance chart book dance for you after my presentation to keep it more entertaining. But I also wanted to say that Emily and Matthew from Urban, my colleagues are also here, and they also really contributed a lot on creating this presentation. So this is a joint effort by the three of us. So we will be looking today at some of the achievements that we have made since the Black Homeownership Collaborative started 3 years ago. And here's the contents of today's presentation. I think a lot of you will already know the relationship between homeownership and wealth, but then I will show you several slides to set the stage. And then we will be looking into how we are doing in achieving the 3 by 30 goal. So that's like 3 million net new Black home owners by 2030, as David mentioned this morning. Since we're in DC, I'm also going to do a deeper dive into looking at some numbers in DC, both in the city and the metro, that we also heard in the morning. And then I'm going to just go over some of the recent innovations that we have made, which I think also has been discussed a lot in the morning session. So this is a good segue. And then I know that in following my presentation, there's going to be some discussion on how to overcome some of the challenges like heirs properties and appraisal biases have been talked. So I'm going to look at several of those challenges and what could be done further. So homeownership and wealth. So this is a recent research that we did showing that in 2022, the wealth gap between homeowners and renters reached its historic high. So you can see that in 2022, the average wealth gap between homeowners and renters were around $1.3 million. And then the median wealth gap was around almost $390,000. And the reason that we have a greater average wealth gap, as we know, is that the wealth is really skewed among those small number of households and individuals. But then you can see that over the past 30 years, both of the graphs shows an upward trend. So we see about a 70% increase in the median wealth gap between homeowners and renters in this country. And then we see about a 260% increase in the average wealth gap between homeowners and renters. So when we first looked at this, we were kind of also thinking about what is driving this. And especially if you look at the past 10 years, and this is for the median wealth gap, because we kind of wanted to focus on typical households. But we do see that the gap, housing wealth really has made a huge contribution in growing wealth gap between homeowners and renters. And you can see that this is also related to the housing supply shortages that we have been talking about in the morning. And then you see that from 2013 to 2022, we have a steep increase in the housing wealth gap between homeowners and renters. And what we also was thinking about, we also hear a lot of stories that it's really, really challenging to become a homeowner right now. So we thought, maybe renters, since they can't really use their down payment saving right now, they might be investing in financial investment, and we also saw some rise in the stock market prices over the recent years. So we thought maybe they are still making some money by investing in financial investment. But we also saw that there has been rising gap in the financial wealth between homeowners and renters. And we show in the data that renters, a lot of them don't really have much left to make financial investment after paying for rent, which also has experienced a pretty sharp increase due to the supply shortages, especially over the past decade. And then this is kind of showing that the delays in homeownership are likely to affect your future wealth. So what we show in the x-axis is that the age of buying your first home. And the blue bar shows that median housing wealth at age 60 or 61. So it's the age near retirement. And what we see is that those who buy their homes earlier in life, they have significantly higher housing housing wealth at the age near retirement. So what we see is that those who bought their first homes between 25 and 34, those were the groups that have the highest housing wealth in the age in their 60s, and then that number goes down as they buy their home, for those who buy their home later in life. And I also wanted to point out that those who buy their homes before age 25, which is not really happening much these days, but they are, compared, the yellow bar is showing the first median home value of the first homes, and this is all inflation adjusted. So they are more likely to buy cheaper homes when they start, but then the amount of wealth that they gain over time, that return is higher for the groups that have bought their homes before age 25. And we also know that homeownership transfers from generation to generation, so it's not only affecting your own wealth, but then it's likely to affect the wealth of your children, because a lot of the parents who own a home are likely to support their child's homeownership in terms of down payment, and that they can also provide some information support. So our research also shows that even after controlling for children's income, education, and wealth, the children of home-owning parents are much more likely to be homeowners earlier in their life. And as we know that Black young adults are much less likely to be having home-owning parents. So this is another factor that explains why there has been a persistent racial homeownership gap, despite some of the changes and efforts that were made to kind of eliminate the more direct racial discrimination in this country. So, so how are we doing with achieving the 3 by 30 goal? So when the pandemic started, I think many of us in this room was really concerned, because like in 2019, just before the pandemic hit, we were finally seeing some improvement in the Black homeownership rate. So for all the other race group, we actually saw that homeownership started to increase back up from 2015, except for the Black households. So they were experiencing an ongoing decline, and then in 2019, we were seeing some positive numbers finally, and then the pandemic hit, where so many of us were at the collaborative was super concerned that we will now like see a reverse trend, and then we will see a further decline in Black homeownership. But then to our pleasant surprise, we did see that Black homeownership continued to increase until the most recent data, which is 2023, and then what the data show is that between 2019 and 2022, we have added about 466,000 Black homeowners, reaching about 6.92 million Black homeowners in the current market. So the Black homeownership rate over this time increased about 2.1 percentage point, and then we were able to close the Black-white homeownership gap by 1.3 percentage points. So some progress has been made, but then it's not fast enough to reach the goal that we are hoping to reach by 2030. So if the Black homeownership rate increases by the current rate, we will have about 8.5 million Black homeowners by 2030, which is about 1 million short of the goal that we're trying to achieve. So now let's look at some numbers in DC and US. And so just some for background, I kind of put where we are in this green. I don't think it's green in the screen, but it's supposed to be green, but we're right there in the green dot. And then we're in DC proper, where the population is about 670K. And then you can see the larger DC metro area, which has about 6.4 million population and 2.4 million households. So as we know, Black households account for a higher share in both DC regions. In the city, there's about 39%, that's in the yellow area here in the graph, of Black households in the city of DC. In the metro, that share is about 26% compared to about 12% in the nation. So I thought when I first kind of looked at this number, I thought this graph was really interesting, because we kind of see really different patterns in like the trajectory of Black homeownership in DC, the city of DC, and DC metro. So what we see here is that, so The sky blue line is the homeownership rate trajectory of DC Metro. The darker blue is the city of DC, and the green line is the US. So in the US, as we know, over the past 40, 50 years or so, we haven't really seen much changes in Black homeownership. The number was about like 42% in 1970, and it's about 4%. So we saw about 2 percentage point increase. But in the city and in DC, up to 2000, we actually saw some upward trends in Black homeownership. So, but then after the Great Recession hit, we actually see that, we've discussed this in the morning, there has been some decline in the city of DC in terms of Black homeownership. So Black homeownership is currently about 33%. In the metro, however, we have seen an ongoing increase in Black homeownership. So what we see in the DC metro is that the homeownership rate was about 31% in 1970. That number is now above 50%. So we're hoping to see this kind of direction, and also our national numbers as well as other numbers. And I think it was kind of enlightening for me to see that there is some areas in the country that have made some progress, and we're actually in the metro that have seen some improvement in Black homeownership. So in the city and a metro, in both the DC regions, we actually have a smaller Black-white homeownership gap than the nation as a whole. So in DC, we talked about like real challenges in affordability in DC, and that holds for both Black and white households. So they do have the lowest homeownership rate, but the gap between the two groups is about 15 percentage points. So it's lower than other areas. And then in the US, we know that there's almost about 30 percentage point gap between Black and white homeownership rate. But in DC Metro, we are seeing about 20 percentage point gap. So if we are able to achieve the 3 by 30 goal by 2030, we are estimating that we will have similar homeownership rate of what we see in the DC Metro. And then the DC Metro experience does suggest that this is like an achievable goal that we can still pursue despite some challenges in the market right now. So this is the rent burden share. So like as like homeownership is becoming more and more challenging, the increase in rent is also increasing the share of renters paying more than 30% of their income on rent. And this yellow area is those who are paying more than 50% of their income on rent. So what we see is that Black renters who are on the left side in all three regions, they have a higher share of rent burden households, which also makes it very difficult for Black renters to save up for down payment compared to white households. But then you can see that overall DC rent burden numbers are lower than the nation, especially the share of severely rent burden households are smaller in both DC proper and DC Metro compared to the nation. And then when we look at those who are homeowners, we kind of talked about sustaining homeownership, but then I think our next steps, like once we achieve the 3 by 30 goal, is like further work towards like reducing the gap in the housing wealth by kind of looking at the home values. So you do see that the median home value gaps exist in all three regions. It's smaller than in DC. It's smaller in the US. There's about a $50,000 gap, but then it's much higher in the city of DC. There's almost over $330,000 median housing value gap between Black homeowners and white homeowners. Although you can also see that in the city of DC, the median home value for Black households is higher than the US. So there's like a lot of numbers there, but then that's the trends that we're seeing from the graphs. And then I'm gonna briefly talk about some recent innovations that we have made. First is the one that Julia just talked about on like forbearance and loss mitigation. So this recent research does highlight that we were able to disproportionately help Black homeowners to stay in the house because of the forbearance policies that were in place. So what we saw in the data is that Black homeowners were most likely to be taking advantage of forbearance during the pandemic, about 20%. So 1 in 5 Black homeowners were in forbearance during the pandemic, and this is the highest among all race and ethnic groups. And then among those, like forbearance, we kind of estimated the number of Black homeowners that we saved from entering into foreclosure, and that number was about 76,000. And that accounts for about 1.7% of like all mortgages by Black homeowners, which again is the highest among all race and ethnic groups. So this number is like, maybe you can think this is like smaller than expected, but then there's also a lot of other things that were going on. We actually saw a faster job market recovery than we expected, and the home prices really was high. So this is also kind of impacting the number of loans that didn't go into forbearance. But then overall, the story tells us that we were able to disproportionately save Black households from entering into foreclosure by these swift actions that were taken in place by a lot of the people who, and I know that a lot of the people today have really worked hard to make this happen. And then we did talk about special purpose credit programs. We have seen an increase in attention of special purpose credit programs for lenders to offer credits to underserved borrowers. There has been several lenders. I know that Marty and then Lisa also mentioned about their special purpose credit programs that took place recently. And then in 2022 and 2023, Fannie and Freddie also launched their own SPCP programs, and also they have started to purchase SPCP loans from the lenders. And then I think there's some cutoff in the slide, but then this was just a little self-promotion of the work that we did with NAFA, because what we found was we heard a lot of stories that especially the small lenders writing a written plan to justify SPCP and really kind of digging into the market data was challenging. So we did launch a data toolkit that helps the lenders to identify what's going on in their markets and also kind of design an effective programs to target the population that they want to kind of serve, and also help them to kind of write the written plan. So that is in this link. So please check it out if you're interested in looking at it for more. And then we did do a little bit, I think, discussion on first-gen home down payment program this morning. And what we did initially in the research was so we kind of wanted to estimate the share and the number of Black home buyers who can benefit from this program. So this graph is kind of showing that most of the DPA programs are just focusing on income eligibility. What we have estimated is that if we increase the income eligibility to, instead of 80% of AMI, which is mostly the federal DPA programs, to 120, but then further impose first-generation criteria indicating that your parents also are not owning a home. How does that kind of serve or target households of color? And we kind of find that in a typical income-eligible DPA program, about 18% of Black home buyers would qualify, but if we impose first-generation down payment program, that share would increase about 30%. So this is a better targeting program if you want to serve the Black or Hispanic community. And then the other debate, I think we heard in the morning that there are some of the criticism towards demand-side policies, especially in this really heated, low supply housing market that is only going to increase price. But what we see from these more targeted programs is that the number of people that can qualify actually is smaller than the income alone program. So it's a better targeting, and it has less upward pressure towards increasing home ownership. So we know that a lot of kind of like while waiting for the federal government has announced again in their new housing affordable, I think plan to kind of this plan is still included in the White House plan, but then while waiting for the federal government to take actions, there have been a lot of like state and local programs that have started to create and implement this program, and then Fannie and Freddie have also collaborated together, and then we also partnered with, I think they also partnered with a lot of people who are sitting here today to kind of really create a clear definition of first generation home buyer, which there's multiple generation. I won't go into detail, but then depending on how you define, there are some changes in the potential number of people who are eligible, and then it also changes how easy or difficult it is to implement this policy. So the GSCs have announced their definition of the first-gen homebuyer in the Equitable Housing Finance Plan, and we're hoping that this will also like facilitate more lenders and more states or localities to take a look into these programs and implement first-gen DPA programs to serve those households who don't benefit from receiving down payment support from their families. And then there has been, Julia has mentioned that the FHA also started to include positive rental payment history in their underwriting, and that also happened among both Fannie and Freddie over the past 2 years. So there has been some movement to really incorporate rental payment history into mortgage underwriting after having this discussion for a really long time. And then the GSCs and some of the startup companies are really making it more easier to report positive rental information to the credit bureaus. And finally, I think still there needs to be more efforts to change the single-family zoning. Although the process may seem slow, but then over the years, a lot of the states and municipalities have worked hard to kind of reform the single-family zoning. So these green dotted area is the places that were successful in changing the zoning and land use regulations to facilitate more development of ADUs and 2-4s, and also like transit-oriented development. So there has been some progress to make innovation in this space, but then there are still challenges ahead, especially in this market where we actually saw a huge surge in interest rate amidst the lack of supply. So this black line in the left is actually showing that the active listing numbers have fallen significantly over time from 2016 to 2024. You can see that although there's seasonal fluctuation, the number of active listings, listed homes for sales have been declining. And then you can see that below that red area is the homes that are below 330K, and that share has declined significantly. So in 2016, that number was around 70%, now it's around 45%. So there is really lack of affordable housing that especially Black households with lower income or lower wealth can take a look at and have an opportunity to purchase. And we can also see that especially in the most recent 2 years with the rise in interest rate, there has been a huge rise in the median housing expense to income. So how homeownership has become more unaffordable in the recent 2-3 years. So this is actually kind of showing in our mortgage data. So I just want to make a caveat that the 2023 data, I calculated this from the HMDA data that is out right now, but it's not final. So there might be some slight changes in the numbers once the CFPB releases the final HMDA data. But what we see is that from 2021 to 2023, there has been a huge drop in mortgage origination in all three areas. But in DC, there's less drop because there's already, even in 2021, it was really difficult to purchase homes in DC, but there has been still 25% drop in the mortgage origination for home purchase for Black households. There's been about 48 percentage point 48% drop for in DC Metro, and then in the US, the drop was about 35%. So there has been a huge decline in the Black home buyers' mortgage origination over the past 2-3 years. And then I think we have talked about denial rate in the morning. I would also like to kind of mention that the application withdrawn from the mortgage process have also increased between 2021 and 2023. So with the rise in interest rate, like a lot of people are just like pulling out during the mortgage application, and you can see that. So this like blue line is 2021 numbers, yellow line is 2023. So you can see that the increase has been happening for all regions, for both Black and whites. But you can also see that for all regions, compared to white borrowers, the people who are kind of taking out their mortgage application is higher for Blacks compared to whites. And you can also see that there has been an increase in mortgage denial rates. And then in all three regions, again, like you can see that denial rate gap is significantly higher than the application withdrawal gap. Black mortgage applicants are substantially more likely to be denied of mortgage compared to white borrowers. And what we also see is that between 2021 and 2023, we see a greater jump in the denial rate among Black borrowers compared to the white borrowers. So this is suggesting it's becoming more and more challenging for Black borrowers to access homeownership in the current situation. And then what we're seeing is, in order to lower the mortgage payment, a lot of the people are putting, let me just see if and then I just want to really kind of quickly mention that, as I think, I forgot who mentioned this, but then we are seeing, I think it was Lisa in the morning, we are seeing that there has been a growing share of mortgage denials because of high debt-to-income ratio in the past 2 years. And then there has also been a significant increase of share of borrowers who have a DTI ratio of 45% and above. So this is all kind of driven by the rise in interest rate that occurred in the past since 2022, early 2022. And then in order to lower the monthly mortgage payment, we see from the data that more and more borrowers are putting more than 20% down. What we see from the data is still, so that number has, compared to 2021, for all race and ethnic groups, we can see that those who put 20% down has increased. But then still, we are seeing that Black borrowers are less likely to put 20% down compared to white borrowers because they are financially resource constrained. So this is meaning that those with like lower wealth and lower financial resources are having more challenges in accessing home ownership because they don't really have substantial wealth to put down and lower the mortgage cost. And then we are also seeing that over the years, there has been a rise in the borrowers with higher FICO scores. So overall, we kind of see that those with higher wealth and higher FICO scores are more likely to enter into the current home buying market compared to those with lower FICO scores and less wealth. And this is also disproportionately impacting Black households. So we talked about appraisal. This is kind of data showing that as the share of people of color increases in the neighborhood, we are seeing that the share of homes that are appraised below a contract price also increases, especially in the US. There are some regional variations. We do see that in the city, there are less share of properties that are appraised below the contract price. So I think this kind of varies by region, but overall, like we do see that as share of households of color increases, the appraisal gap is likely to be larger. And then This is, I think, the next panel's discussion on what the NAR settlements how it will play out. There has been some initial research done in this space that shows that this would likely to disproportionately harm households of color, especially Black households, because they don't have financial resources to pay an upfront fee to the real estate brokers when they purchase a home. So the research shows that the number of Black renters who will qualify for $250,000 mortgage will fall about 26%, which is the greatest decline among all race and ethnic groups. Finally, I'm going to end with some of the climate change data. So we do see that the average home insurance premiums have increased, and the growth rate of the insurance premium is going up over the years. And then the other thing that we see in the data is that Black households are less likely to have home insurance compared to the white households, especially in the nation. About 12% of Black homeowners don't have a home insurance, indicating if they do face national disaster, they are much more likely to face a greater loss. So I will end there. Thank you for listening, and I'll turn it over to Charles.